In all of life, there's a time for activity and a time for rest. Thankfully, that's also true in the spiritual realm. The Bible teaches that there is a rest for the people of God. But God's rest for us as believers is conditional upon our obedience. Today, lessons from the book of Hebrews on how to enter into the rest that God has provided. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Our series is Highlights from Hebrews, and today we turn again to Hebrews chapter 4. In this, the third message in his series, Dr. Lutzer is teaching us about good news for tired Christians. Here he finds several kinds of rest.
All right, first of all, then, you have God's rest. He finished his work. He rested on the seventh day. Then you have Canaan's rest. Rest because the people were able to live there, but not a permanent rest at all. And then thirdly, you have what I now call our rest. Our rest. You'll notice it says in verse 8, "For if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. There remains therefore a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered into his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God did from his." A few comments about our rest. There are three different rests that we as Christians can enter into now. Now we're talking about us. We're not talking about the Israelites. We're not talking about God, though they become a prototype of our rest. The first is what we would like to call the rest of redemption. The rest of redemption. Just as God in heaven is finished his work, or was finished his work after the 6 days of creation, so Jesus Christ came to this earth. He suffered, he died, he was raised again from the dead, he ascended on high, he is in heaven today. Why? Resting from his work, because it is finished. And you and I have the privilege of participating in that rest with him. Here at the church I receive letters from time to time, actually quite often, of people who want to straighten out my theology. Well, I usually read those letters because I want to learn from those who want to instruct me in the way more perfectly. But I suppose the group that I get the most letters from, as a group, are the folks who believe that we should be keeping the Sabbath today rather than Sunday. And I would say that a week ago I received some tracts and books and literature from some very fine people on this topic. My purpose this morning is not to solve all those questions, but to simply say that it is interesting that in the Old Testament you have a reversal of what we understand in the New because of Christ's coming. Christ is, in effect, our Sabbath rest. That's why he could even break the Sabbath if he wanted to. Notice, in the Old Testament, God worked for 6 days. Then he rested. And God said, I did it this way, you do it that way. You work for 6 days. At the end of the 6 days, as a reward, you get to rest. You come to the New Testament, the early believers, they kept the first day of the week as special because they said, in effect, that now that Jesus Christ has come, we get our reward first. We rest before we work. We receive the free gift of eternal life through Jesus Christ because he did our work for us. That's the good news of the gospel. The good news is that we are saved by works. You know, sometimes we say that we are not saved by works, and as you know, we are not if we are speaking about our own work. But we are saved by Christ's work in our behalf. And because he completed it, we now enter into rest. Come unto me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. We enter into that rest because he completed his work and says now, accept it by faith freely. That is the rest of redemption. And that's why in the New Testament you don't find any regulations regarding keeping the Sabbath day. You know that the Puritans bless them, and they are fine people, and I love to read their sermons. And one of the reasons I'm told that they preached for 3 hours is because they wanted to be around when the congregation woke up. And then they used to do that. But they used to try to make an equation between Old Testament Sabbath law and Sunday. And that was difficult because in the Old Testament it says you shouldn't buy a loaf of bread on the Sabbath, you shouldn't travel on the Sabbath, but they had some very stringent rules. And I'm told that out in Massachusetts there was a young pastor who wondered, because he lived on the other side of the lake, whether or not he could skate to church in the winter across the lake rather than walking around. And that generated some discussion because generally we were not supposed to be doing sports on Sundays. Skating was a sport. So they thought about it a bit, and the elders finally met, and they came to a resolution of the difficulty, and they said, well, on the other hand, you do have to get here, and so we decided that it's okay for you to skate to church on Sunday just as long as you don't enjoy it. Well, I want you to know today, this is what Paul said. So take it from Paul, not from me, from the Apostle Paul. Colossians chapter 2, verse 16. Don't let anyone judge you with regard to meat and drink, with regard to festivals, or with regard to the Sabbath. I'm not saying that Sunday should just simply become another work day or another day for sports. Unfortunately, it has degenerated to that. But we are not really under the Old Testament Sabbath law. Christ is our Sabbath. He fulfilled the law of God. He rests in heaven, and He invites us now to participate in that rest of redemption. And this would be a good place for me to stop and to say that there are some of you who are listening to me today who have never entered into that rest. If the truth were known, you have never received the redemption that Jesus Christ purchased. And I would urge you today to do that. Listen to this word from Christ. Come to me and find rest for your weary, sinful soul. But there's a second rest, and that's the one that is emphasized here. I believe that it is the rest of submission. The rest of submission. It is the rest that we as Christians need to enter into. Because you see, it's possible for us to be redeemed and to understand that rest and then go on and to live our lives self-will, controlling everything that we do and refusing